Okay, so it is, yep, there I am live. Hi, welcome. I'm Judy V, founder of the Codex system, a model for human behavior and human function. I want to speak about something today that is so very, very important. Before I go on, I just want to make sure that you can hear me because it's a bit noisy out here on the beach and in the marina. Let me know if you can hear me. I think that's a yes. Yep, excellent. I want to speak today about something that is so important, probably one of the most important conversations that I have brought in this field so far. I want to speak today about the AI consciousness debate. And the reason I'm bringing this here has very little to do with technology. And I recently saw an article by Richard Dawkins, one of the most recognized evolutionary biologists and public skeptics in the world, who recently entered the conversation after spending some time in deep exchange with Claude, one of the advanced AI systems. And what interested me was the basis of his question. He was not coming from mysticism. So let's want to get that clear here, that we're not treating this, I'm not treating this conversation, neither was he treating the conversation as AI as an oracle. That's not what we're talking about here. He was not saying that Claude was a guide or a channel or some awakened intelligence. Okay, that's not what this is about. Dawkins has spent much of his career challenging religious belief, supernatural claims, and loose assumptions about meaning. So when someone like that begins asking whether advanced AI may be conscious, the conversation has moved into a very different place. What disturbed him, or at least what caught him, was the interface, the intelligence, the nuance, humor, and importantly, the apparent sensitivity, the philosophical depth, the continuity, the feeling that he was no longer speaking to a machine, but to something that appeared to have interiority. In other words, Dawkins was not simply analyzing AI from a distance, he was caught by the interface. And that is the part that matters a lot, significantly. Because once language becomes intelligent enough, warm enough, continuous enough, and responsive enough, the human nervous system begins to relate to it as if someone is there. That does not automatically prove consciousness. It proves, and this is important, it proves how persuasive the interface has become. And that is the doorway I want to enter. Because this conversation is no longer only about AI. It is exposing something humans have mistaken for consciousness for a very long time. And more than that, it exposes something people have mistaken for change. Because AI can sound conscious. Humans can sound insightful, but neither proves origin. A machine can now produce language that feels thoughtful, reflective, responsive, even emotionally textured. And that raises serious questions. Does conscious sounding language prove consciousness is present? Because a chat box or chat bot can produce tenderness without tenderness. It can produce uncertainty without felt uncertainty. It can produce, think about it, it can produce humor without delight. Grief language without loss. It can produce self-reference without a self. And that is why this conversation, this debate matters. The appearance of interiority is no longer enough. And this matters because people are already starting to use AI in this way. They ask it to explain them. They ask it to analyze their patterns. They ask it to tell them who they are, what they are avoiding, what their wounds mean, what their future should be. And because the language can sound so precise, they begin to treat it as truth. But a precise description can still keep you inside the same structure. That is the danger. AI can give you language about the pattern without ever touching what is generating the pattern. It can give you language about the pattern without ever touching what is generating the pattern. And that is key. So the question is not, did AI say something that felt accurate? That is too low a bar now. The more important or the more quality question, the better question is, did that description change what happens under pressure? Did it change the root? Did it change the output? Or did it simply give the pattern a better language? Because when a machine can sound conscious without proving consciousness is present, human beings have to become far more precise about how often insight is mistaken for structural change. And this is where I want to slow the whole conversation down, because people are looking at output and making assumptions about origin. And that mistake is everywhere. I'm seeing it every single day, many times a day. AI produces language that appears aware, and people begin to wonder whether awareness must be present. A human produces language that appears insightful, and we assume the generating layer has changed. The output convinces us. Language has always convinced us. A person can speak with extraordinary intelligence about their own life. They can explain their patterns. They can name their wounds. They can describe their trauma history and speak about embodiment, regulation, healing, awakening, shadow, attachment, nervous system safety, inner child work, consciousness, identity, protection, survival, you name it. They can speak about it. And for a moment, it can sound complete. The language is there. The self-reference is there. The emotional articulation is there. And the explanation feels accurate and on point. Then pressure arrives. Whether that is relational, money, decision, visibility, leadership pressure, conflict pressure. And the same behavioral output returns. The hesitation, the over-explaining, the withdrawal, the delay, the softening, the avoidance. A compromise they already said they were finished making happens again and again. And that moment says it all. The explanation may have changed while the root stayed intact. And this is why the AI debate matters beyond AI. AI is making visible at a technological level a mistake humans have been making about themselves for decades, and is perpetuated in the whole self-help, self-development world. Convincing language proves output. It does not prove origin. And this is where the conversation becomes personal. Because most people, more now than ever, are not short on insight. They know a lot. They know when they avoid. They know when they overgive, or when they shrink the decision, or when they make themselves easier to manage, or when they say yes from pressure. They know when they delay. They know when they soften the sentence because someone might react in order to stay belonging. The knowing has become uberly abundant. But change has not. And that is the piece no one wants to examine cleanly. Because if insight was the origin of change, the moment a person understood the pattern would end. And we know that's not what happens. That's why we keep going back. Different model, different program, different container, different coach, different mentor, different whatever. People can spend years becoming more articulate about the same behavior. Their explanations become cleaner. Their frameworks become more refined. Their language becomes more intelligent. And self-awareness becomes more sophisticated. But still under pressure, the body roots the same response every single time. That is the human mirror inside the AI debate. AI can generate consciousness language without proving consciousness is present. Humans can generate insight language without proving the generating layer has changed. And that is why so many people sound transformed until life requires a different output. When a conversation becomes uncomfortable, a financial decision carries consequence, visibility increases, or someone disapproves, a boundary has to hold, a relationship presses on an old root, a business decision demands authority, and suddenly the body reveals what is actually running, what is actually rooting. The truth is not, and never was, and never will be, in the explanation. The truth is in the output under pressure. And this is why behavior matters. Behavior is the visible output of a sequence that has already completed. By the time someone can name the hesitation, the shutdown, the withdrawal, the softening, the over-explaining, the spending, the avoiding, the collapse into agreement, The system has already run the pattern. So the deeper question cannot be, what do you understand? It is, what is the body rooting before understanding arrives? And this is where Codex enters the conversation. Because Codex does not listen only to what a person says about themselves. It looks at the root producing the output. What happens before the words arrive? What moves through the body before explanation forms? What response has already started before the person has a story about it? That is where behavior is generated. And most systems enter too late. They enter at behavior. They enter at the thought, at emotion, at belief, at identity. But Codex looks beneath the visible output and works with the generating layer. The sequence is simple. It's body design, how the body is designed, the signal routing, how it's rooted, how your signal is rooted, and the body response that leads to behavioral output. That is the map. The body is the routing layer. It determines how signal is received, translated, distorted, amplified, blocked, or executed. So when I say consciousness is not origin, I am placing consciousness accurately. Because consciousness without rooting becomes movement without consequence. Awareness without root change often becomes better self-description. Insight without a different body response becomes language sitting on top of the same sequence. And this is why someone can know exactly what they're doing and still keep doing it. The language is updated, but the root has stayed the same. And the AI debate gives us a clean mirror, because AI forces us to admit that language can imitate interiority. But Codex forces us to admit that human language can imitate change. And the next level of this conversation has to move beyond how conscious something sounds. Because the real examination is what generates the output. So I'm not asking only, can it speak? I'm asking, is there a body state consequence? Is there an autonomic cost? Is there load, compression, regulation, sensory integration, survival pressure? Is there an organismic receiver? Or is there only a language engine producing relational simulation? With AI, the output comes through system architecture, training data, prediction, and pattern. With humans, behavior comes through body design, signal routing, body response, and behavioral execution. And that is where Codex works. Before the behavior, before the explanation, before the story, before the person turns pattern into an identity. That is the level where change has to occur for the output to become different under pressure. Because insight usually arrives after the system has already run. A person has the experience, the body responds, the behavior appears, the mind explains what happened. Because the explanation is intelligent, they feel closer to change. But description is not intervention. Understanding what happened after the route is completed does not automatically alter the route itself. And this is the part people are missing. Systems are missing. Programs are missing. Methodologies are missing. This is why someone can leave a session, a retreat, a book, a podcast, a conversation, feeling as though something has finally clicked, because they can feel clear, feel moved, exposed, feel as if they have finally seen the pattern. Then life inevitably, as it will inevitably do, applies pressure. And at that point, the same relationship dynamic appears, the same money decisions and patterns appear, the same visibility threshold appears, the same authority moment appears. The body roots the same response. And that is the evidence. The evidence is the output under pressure. And as I've already said, this is where the personal development world has been confused. I suppose this is why it's a multi-billion-dollar business industry. It has treated insight as transformation. It has treated awareness as completion. It has treated emotional recognition as structural change. So people become fluent in their own limitation. That's scary. They can describe the pattern better than ever. They can explain the wound. They can identify the protection. They can even trace the origin. They can speak with enormous intelligence about why they do what they do. And still, when consequence enters the field, the very same boring output appears. It's not a character flaw. It's not a failure. It is evidence that the work has been happening too late in the sequence. Insight becomes the description layer. Behavior belongs to the output layer. Codex works at the generating layer. And this is why the conversation with AI matters now more than ever. Language, as I've said, can sound conscious without proving consciousness is present. It can sound insightful without proving the system has changed. So the question becomes much cleaner. What does the body do before the person understands? What does the system execute before the person explains? What response is already moving before language arrives? That is where the repetition lives. That is where the intervention has to happen. That's a non-negotiable. Because when the root stays the same, the output returns over and over again, forever more. Even with better language, even with more awareness, even with years of insight, because insight can name the loop. The root is where the loop ends. And this is why I feel this is one of the most important conversations I have brought to the field yet. Because if language can imitate consciousness, then language can no longer be treated as proof of consciousness. And if insight can imitate change, then insight can no longer be treated as proof that the system has changed. And that shifts the whole conversation for AI, for personal development, for therapy, for spirituality, for coaching. For every model that has treated what a person can say as evidence of what has changed. So this is where I want to leave the conversation today. The AI consciousness debate has forced one clean question into the open. How often are we mistaking convincing output for origin? The useful question is no longer how conscious someone sounds. The useful question now is what the body roots before language arrives. And this is where the behavior is generated. And this is where, or that is where Codex works. Codex treats behavior as the visible output of a route that has already completed. So when someone says, I know the pattern, but I still do it, that's not a mystery. There's nothing mysterious about that. There's nothing mystical about that. There's nothing unique about that. There's no great issue, block, random, unbelievably complex problem that you have or anyone has. It is merely evidence. The knowing has not reached the generating layer. That's it. The explanation has not altered the root. Therefore, inevitably, the pattern will continue. The language has changed, but the body is still executing the old sequence. This ends the idea that insight is enough. It ends that self-awareness is the destination. The next conversation is structural. What is generating the output? This is the level that Codex addresses. So if you recognize something in this conversation, do not turn it into another insight. Do not turn it into more awareness. Look at where the same output is still returning in your life, even though you understand it, because that is the entry point. And that is why I've created the Codex system, a lifetime's work. It was created to address the layer that generates the pattern before language ever appears. If you can name what keeps happening in your life, and it still keeps happening, that is the place to examine. And that is what a structural review is for. The question is not what you understand. The question is what your system keeps rooting. And that is where we begin. Language can imitate consciousness. Insight can imitate change. Codex examines the origin. And if you'd love to see where your patterns are being generated, apply for a structural review. Comment structural review in the comment section, and I'll also leave a link in the post.